Good evening, everybody. I'm Jillian Coley, the owner of Wellesley Books in Wellesley, Mass. And welcome to the September, I almost said August, meeting of the Boston.com book club. A couple of housekeeping issues this evening. We will be using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen throughout the event, and there'll also be time at the end if you have questions for Hannah after our discussion. And the event is also being recorded. So if you afterwards would like to refer back to it or share it with a friend, or perhaps if you haven't read the book, after you have read it, you would like to refer back to some of Hannah's comments, that will be available to you. The audience audio and video are off throughout, so you have complete anonymity and can have that extra glass of wine and no one will be the wiser. So it is my great pleasure this evening to be talking with Hannah Halperin about her new novel, Something Wild. Hannah earned her MFA at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and is an instructor of fiction at Boston's own Grub Street Writing Center. And her stories have appeared in numerous publications, including the Kenyon Review and the New Ohio Review. Something Wild is Hannah's debut novel, and though it's only been out since June, it's already garnered widespread praise from the likes of the Washington Post, the Kirkus Review, Publishers Weekly, and Good Morning America. The New York Times review of books calls it propulsive, tender, frustrating, and entirely realistic. So welcome, Hannah.
Hi.
Hi. Well, I thought we might jump right in with that description of Something Wild as entirely realistic. For those who haven't read the book yet, and without giving away any spoilers, Something Wild is the story of two adult daughters who return to their childhood home in the suburbs of Boston and discover that their mother is being abused by their stepfather. And it won't come as a surprise to anybody who has read the book to learn that you, Hannah, have worked as a counselor with victims of domestic violence. So can you start by telling us a little bit about that work and how it informed your story, whether you were inspired by particular people or particular cases you encountered?
Yeah, I can definitely talk a little bit about my work, and thank you also for Jillian for doing this event with me, and thank you to Boston.com for putting on this book club. So yeah, I have been working in the fields of domestic violence for about 5 years. And for the first 2 years, I was working as a domestic violence and rape crisis counselor out on Martha's Vineyard. And for the last 3 years, I've been working at Emerge, which is an intimate partner abuse education program. So they provide counseling and education for people who have been abusive to an intimate partner. And I think when I, part of what I've gained from doing this work is sort of just having my eyes open to the prevalence of domestic violence and the prevalence of gender-based violence and particularly violence against women. And, what I kind of started to see was once I was really aware of it, I was seeing it not just at work, but I was seeing it everywhere. And I think, when I was writing this novel, I wasn't really thinking of it as a novel.
Okay, I think we have lost Hannah for a moment. I'll just give her a second and see if she pops back in. Oh, here she comes. This is the world of virtual events. Hi, Hannah, you're back. We lost you for a moment there.
I'm so sorry about that. I
It's
don't know.
okay.
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking of this as a novel about domestic violence. It was very much a novel about these three women, these two adult sisters and their mother, and you know, I think most women have experienced some sort of abuse or some sort of violence in their lives, whether it's been physical or emotional. And so I wasn't drawing on particular clients or particular cases. So everything is made up or fictional in the book. So, you know, I kept everything at work confidential, but I was certainly, I think what I was absorbing at work seeped into my writing and sort of seeped into my understanding of just the world and people and relationships in a pretty profound way.
Sure. Well, in your book, the three main characters all, once this abuse is uncovered, they handle it very, very differently. One of the sisters, she wants action, she wants a restraining order. Another's really conflicted by her own residual feelings of affection for the stepfather, the abuser. And then the mother, who's the victim, who wants to just lie low and not rock the boat. Is that the dynamic that you encounter within families and support systems where there's disagreement about how to handle situations, crises?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people have really different reactions about what to do. I think when someone comes to you and tells you that they're in an abusive relationship, there's a good chance that you're probably only hearing part of what's going on. It's really only that person who's in the relationship that knows the full extent. So it's actually really only that person who really knows best what the safest thing to do is. But a lot of people have maybe acting out of fear or panic or care for, you know, what they think they want to do, especially if they're protective of that person. But you know, these three characters have, you know, very different reactions to the abuse that they're witnessing or that they have faced. And I was really interested in how three women, like all in the same family, could have such different reactions, especially two sisters who grew up in the same family. And I think that happens. It was something that I saw happen for sure. And you know, I think this book is very, if you've read it, you know, but it's very heavy in flashback. And that felt really important to me because I was really interested in the way these two sisters grew up and sort of the roles that they occupied in their family as children, and the roles they were given in their family as children, and sort of how this led them to be the women they are.
You write so beautifully about the bond between the sisters, and, you know, once so close and then as adults really fractured and full of resentment and yet love too. And they have a complicated relationship with their mother. They're concerned about her, but they're frustrated in their dealings with her, and they feel guilty when they figure out what's going on. Did this dynamic between the three sort of evolve as you were writing, or was that, it sounds like you kind of had that in mind as you set out?
I think both. You know, it was the sister dynamic was there for me from the beginning. I just kind of had this sense of how they were together, and then the more I wrote the mother's character, Lorraine, I was sort of figuring out. You know, I think having three characters together is a pretty interesting dynamic because you have kind of that triangulation, and what are they like when two are together? What are they like when all three? And how did the three of them change from when, you know, the girls were younger to when they grew up, and you can kind of do a lot when there's those three characters, because there's always that option for feeling left out or feeling jealous, or and I see all three of them as very, very close and kind of speaking this language with one another, but they also are constantly letting each other down. And I mean, that happens all the time in families, I think. So yeah, I was figuring it out as I went along, I think.
Well, they have a lot of secrets. Then the whole family is just sort of riddled with secrets. Some of them horrifying, adolescent trauma and spousal abuse. Some of them seemingly more benign, like the pregnancy of one or a friendship with the stepmother. Do you think keeping secrets like that is sort of intrinsic to every family, although perhaps not such toxic ones? Is there a point at which secrets are essential for survival within a family? What's the role for you of these secrets, which almost become a character themselves?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about that before. I mean, I think, like, I guess when you brought up that question, I think of there's secrets, and then there's also, the right to boundaries and right to privacy, and you're allowed to have secrets. You don't have to tell your family everything, and then there's a point to which you're holding these things inside, and it's sort of it's taking over. It's becoming a life of its own, and that's what's sort of happening in the Bloom family, especially secrets that aren't being spoken about, and like that silence just it turns pretty toxic, and it's loud in its own way. I imagine that all families have secrets, but I can't imagine them not having, but I don't actually know.
Well, you open with the introduction of a secret language between the girls as children, and your title, Something Wild, I'm assuming refers, at least in part, to the wild thing, which is a phrase that they have coined to describe a sense of, correct me if I misread this, but sort of impending danger that's both exciting and also scary at the same time. And their pursuit of that leads them to some risky behavior, and with pretty dire consequences. Where did that notion come from, the wild thing?
That to me was something that I have always known that I wanted to write about for a while. And then I ended up, opening the novel with this feeling. And I was like super interested in, like, particularly girls having, this almost sixth sense of danger. And when do we develop that? And and sort of also this sixth sense of knowing when to step in and help one another when that shows up, and how these two young girls, even when they're quite young, sort of know that without really having the language to talk about it. So they make up their own language. And then, part of what this story is about is how that gets complicated when they feel pitted against one another, which I feel like so happens with girls when they get to a certain age. So it turns quite dark.
A lot of the story is looking at the love between these three women, and exploring how it falls on them to kind of hold things together when they're failed by men in their lives and by the court system. Was that theme part of your original intent, or was that something else that came to the surface as you proceeded?
it wasn't something that I was especially focused on while I was writing, but I think it probably came a bit out of what I experienced at my work. And, you know, seeing seeing the moments in between. I think sometimes, I mean, I think the court system often fails women. And I see so much victim blaming happening sort of again and again. And then, you know, you'll see these moments sort of in between hospital visits or going to court, and sort of women showing up for one another in ways. And those kind of moments in between these more dramatic moments. And those moments always kind of struck me as powerful. And I see these you know, these two sisters and this mother, as they'll show up for one another no matter what, even though in some ways they can't stand each other.
Right. They drive each other crazy. Yeah. And I think you do that so well, where there are big issues and crises that happen and big events, but at the same time, it's a story of really daily interaction and love between these family members. And that's a big part, I think, of what makes it a really delightful read, even while digesting these kind of heavier topics. You did use 6 different points of view, if you count all 3 characters' past and present stories. That seems really hard. I know you do teach writing. Maybe you can tell us a little about some of the challenges that carrying all of those voices presented for you.
Yeah, it didn't happen in one go. Like, it was kind of a super messy and chaotic process writing this novel. Like, I think I wrote it in like every possible point of view, and I think when I first started writing it, I think I wrote almost the entire thing from just Nessa's point of view.
Oh, that's one of the sisters.
It's the older sister. And then I realized that I wanted to, you know, have it be from both sisters' point of view. At one point I had written the whole thing in first person, and then I decided to change it to third person. I also had originally written like 300 pages of their childhood that I ended up cutting, like, you know, so many pages, and, you know, really trying to find my bearings of like, what story do I want to tell and whose story do I want to tell? And so that took a lot. So it was a lot of conversations with my agent about that. And she really helped me kind of figure that out. But ultimately I was like, this is a story about 2 sisters. And I thought it was really important to go into Lorraine, their mother's point of view as well. But, you know, if you read the novel, it's not equal pages to all 3 characters. And it's not equal between past and present. I mean, I haven't added up the pages, but I eventually found what felt right to me, but it didn't come right away. It took a lot of like trial and error.
You really capture, I think, effectively the feelings and the experiences of the girls during their teen years in those flashbacks to that period. And that's a tricky voice to capture. Do you have adolescence in your life, or did you keep a journal at that stage that helps keep that fresh? Because it's hard to recreate, and it's very believable here.
Thank you. No, I don't have adolescence in my life. So this novel began as a short story that I wrote specifically about this kind of very intense female friendship in the teenage years. And,
Okay.
and I really like writing about like teenage girls, I think, because I remember being a teenager really vividly, and kind of, I don't know, I guess I remember it. I do have a diary from that time, from when I was like around 15. Like I used to write like every day in a diary, and like I have that whole time. And in some ways I'm like, oh, I'm like the exact same person that I was then, and like all the same neuroses and everything. But I mean, I am hopefully pretty different now, but it's, I don't know. I think when I see like accurate portrayals, or what feels accurate to me of that time, it's like really, that's very engrossing to me. So it really started off as the teenage part. And then I became really interested in like, who would these teenagers grow up to be? Mm-hmm. And who were these teenagers as younger girls? So it started in that middle part. And then I was like, let's make it go bigger.
Right. Well, I feel that was very effective. Often one can always sense teenagers written by adults that sound like adults trying to sound like teenagers. And this came through very clearly, and as though we were really knowing them 20 years earlier. So that was well done. I wondered a little bit about the geography of the book. This is a Boston-based book group, and your story is set in the suburbs of Boston. Do you feel that the geography had any bearing on the story, or could it have happened anywhere in New England? Could it have happened anywhere in the country?
That is a good question. I had originally written it without honestly too much of a setting. And, I grew up around here. I'm from around here. And I had actually picked Arlington, Massachusetts, and particularly Winter Street, because I used to work on Winter Street. Mm-hmm. And so I just knew that, I could visualize it, but the setting was almost completely stripped from the novel. It was like I was so in like the minds of the character, the relationships, that there was almost no setting. And my editor, Allison, she had really talked to me about wanting there to be more of a setting, and sort of getting a feel for like, what are these different towns in New England, and what do they mean? What does each one signify? What's the class of each one? And sort of through editing, I did a lot more work with the setting, and I think it makes, I feel like it made a huge difference in the book. It ended up sort of, I think, bringing up a lot about character in ways that were interesting to me, but thinking a lot about sort of where the characters could live, and but I don't know if I think the story could take place in other parts of the country as well. And domestic violence happens everywhere, in every town or city or suburb, but I'm glad that it's more grounded in this particular place. And
yeah, it did feel very local. Of course, books do that often happens when one reads a book set in a familiar place, but at least I think for people in this area, they will appreciate that aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, because I am an independent bookseller with your book on my shelves, and we are called upon every day to make recommendations to our customers. How would you suggest, if we had a minute to pitch your book to a customer, what would we tell them about it?
Oh, I would describe the book as a book about two sisters, who go home for the weekend, and they discover that their mom is in an abusive marriage, and it stirs up a lot for the sisters about their past. And I mean, in some ways I see it as a character study of these three different women, and I hope that it's also a page turner, but I don't know. And that's pretty much how I would describe it.
What kind of books do you like reading in your free time?
I like reading mostly kind of very character driven books, and I'm reading a book right now called Cherry by Nico Walker, and I'm really liking that. It's I don't know. I think I like books where there's like just this kind of like startling honesty and startling like vulnerability, and where you can kind of get lost in the story and in someone else's life. And yeah, that book is about the opioid epidemic, and I'm just looking at my coffee table right now where some books are scattered.
What would we see on your bedside table?
Monogamy by Sue Miller is a book that I read recently that I just love. I think books about like relationships and families.
Right. Also set in Cambridge.
Yeah, also set in Cambridge. Yeah. I think books that just sort of get into the messiness of relationships, and always down for.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, I think I will open it up to questions from our audience. A couple of people submitted questions in advance. Somebody asked whether the characters lead you or whether you lead them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that it's a little bit of both. Usually when I'm writing, I will tend to kind of like follow the details. So I will, write a detail about a character, or, put a character in a situation, and kind of the exciting thing about writing a scene is kind of figuring out how would that character react, or creating a very specific detail about a character. And then I'm sort of getting to know my characters through writing that scene. And then I kind of have these little nuggets about the character. And then I'm building it that way. And then when I'm writing the next scene, I have all that valuable information that I've just kind of created. And so each scene that I write kind of becomes more and more informed by what I've already written, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So then, by the time I've finished writing the first draft, I know that character so much more by the end than how I knew them by the beginning. So sometimes I have to, go back to the beginning and edit, because I know them better than how I, at the beginning, I'm kind of feeling my way a bit. So it's that's kind of my process in terms of building character.
Okay. And just to remind anybody who has a question in our audience to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you want to tell us where you're from or whether you've read the book yet, feel free to add that in. In the meantime, We have another question from an audience member who would like to know if you can tell us one thing that you hope your readers gain from this story.
Oh, I think one thing that would I hope readers might gain from reading this is I think that it's hard to navigate conversations about, if someone comes to you and discloses that they're in an abusive relationship, and it can just be a hard thing, whether you're the person who you're the one who's telling that to a friend, or you're the friend who's being told that to. And I think, the characters in this novel have a hard time with it. And I hope the book maybe opens up conversation about like how to have those conversations. And I think sometimes maybe there's this pressure to say the right thing, and really if someone's coming to you and telling you that, even just sort of listening and believing them is huge. And it's probably because they trust you enough to come. But so hopefully the book will make people feel less alone in those kinds of situations or conversations.
Yeah. And maybe understand too that as a person with a natural tendency to want to fix things, that's not always what's being asked. At least that was something I took away from the book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have another reader who would like to know how you chose your characters' names, and she's particularly interested in your choice of Nessa.
Oh my gosh, that's actually a really interesting question. The character Nessa, someone really close to me, when I was living in Madison, I had, in the story that I had written, I was trying to come up with I feel like it's so hard to come up with the perfect name, and I was trying to come up with the perfect name for this character, and this friend came up with this name, and it was for the story, but this friend actually passed away. Mm-hmm. And I decided to keep the name, just kind of as a way to keep that memory alive. So yeah, I've never actually told anyone that, but that's how Nessa was chosen. And then Tanya Tanya and Lorraine, I think, just came up out of nowhere. I think sometimes like names, I'll spend like a lot of time like, search engine baby names, like looking at a whole list of names, trying to just come up with the perfect name. I don't remember how I came up with the other ones.
You ever change a name after you get going in a story because something doesn't feel quite right?
Yeah, I think sometimes I'll like be using a name and I'll just know like this isn't the right name, and I'll have to stop and like find it. But Tanya and Lorraine always just felt, those three names always felt right to me. So yeah.
Right. Okay. We have another viewer who asks, who says, I am always curious about the title of a book and the plot. I was unable to make that connection here. I initially thought The Wild Thing was Tanya having sex with Dan, but quickly disregarded that idea. What is the meaning of the title? So I thought it referred in part to something wild was referring to the wild thing, but perhaps you have other, there were other references as well.
Yeah, good question. The title came late in the game for me. I was like trying to come up with a title, and I had actually originally found that the title, it's like a little mention. I can't remember like where in the novel, but it's somehow referring to the mother, Lorraine's loneliness. It's described as something wild. And I thought that really like resonated with me. But it also connects to this is exactly what you said, this sensation, this weird feeling that Nessa and Tanya have when they're kids called the wild thing. And that to me was, this feeling of danger, this feeling that was also this feeling of protectiveness, and that they felt as girls, and sort of echoed throughout the book. So it had a few different meanings to me, but that was kind of what was behind the title.
Thank you. And we have another question asking, if the book was to be made into a movie, what actors and actresses would you see playing your characters?
Oh my gosh. I don't have a great answer for this. It's such a good question, because that would be so exciting. But I don't have like my cast in my head yet. But I will think about that, and if there's ever the opportunity.
Yes, in case you're approached on the subject.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if nobody else has any questions, then I don't see anything else popping up. Just looking there, no, no, I think that is it. So I want to thank you, Hannah, for talking with us this evening, and let you know how much I look forward to continuing to sell your book in the store, and absolutely letting people know that while it deals with some very serious and heavy topics, there's also a hopeful vein that runs through it, and that it is propulsive, it moves quickly, and it's you just really get invested in each of these characters and root for each of them throughout. So so thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so nice to talk to you, and I really appreciate being here.